guys and gals, welcome back. So today is a follow-on from last week's video, making a tribute to the Josh Wink High State of Consciousness. And I'll be honest, after last week, I didn't really have a full idea of which direction I would take my tribute in terms of how would I modernize a classic acid track. But then I had a great idea, and I want to show you where I've taken it. Let's go. Okay, so after last week, I decided this was my favorite. It's not strictly the closest of the riffs I did in terms of tribute to Josh Wink, but it is the grooviest. I really like this gap in the middle. And we have a few more bends than Josh Wink used, although, you know, this is just a 303 feature, so acid lines did have them. We've got an upwards bend here, two here. We know Josh Wink only used the one. I don't have as many staccato notes because I've decided to put this gap in for the groove, but we'll come to that later. The other reason that supported me picking this one was after playing around with breaks and drums, I decided it fit best with one of the better breaks I found. So we've still got our Josh Wink style drums here. That's not too different to what he had. It's all 909 except a snare sample from a break. Mine is a legal sample though, however. Josh Wink didn't credit any of the breaks on his track. All the breaks I'm using in this track are going to be from the Vintage Break series by Sample Magic. Thoroughly recommended. They do fantastic recreations of all the classics. James Brown, Lynn Collins, and of course the Amen Break by the Winstons, Amen Brother. It's all in there in really vintage sounding form. They sound really close to the originals, but not close enough that they'll get flagged on YouTube's Content ID system, which is really, really important. Anyway, I found a great Lynn Collins groove to go on top of this. Sounds like this together. Very, very groovy. And if you listen to my acid line on top of this, that's got me bouncing in my chair already. That's super groovy. I love that. So that was my first reason for picking the riff. As I was playing around with grooves, I realized this vibe we've got here. When I was trying to think, where would we take a modern version of Josh Wink, I realized this is the same pattern as a fairly recent track by Swedish House Mafia and Fred Again. You'll see I've got it up here. It's called Turn on the Lights. I won't play it now for copyright reasons, obviously. But it's a very similar groove, but it's not a 4 on the floor. It's really funky. They've kind of gone for a bicep vibe, very atmospheric track, whereas I just want to take the drum pattern because it's the same, and they have a pitching 808, really thick bass line in there as well. And that's the other thing I wanted to do with the modern tribute would be bring the bass end up to modern par, because tracks back then, bottom end wasn't as good as it is today. And I thought this would be a great recent example because the bottom end is super thick. So I use that for a reference. And if you combine the sub and the beats, got a new kick drum up here as well to match the Fred Again and Swedish House Mafia track, we end up with this kind of groove. Which is really fresh, very different to your typical 4 on the floor. Kind of reminds me where Jungle was going back in the 90s, except obviously much slower tempo. We're at 130 I've gone for here, but with the acid line on top of that we get. And then I was wondering what to do to change it up for the second half of the first drop, and I came across another break, just in the way Josh Wink changes up his breaks twice in the track. We're layering an extra break here. Let me show you what that sounds like. So we got our Josh Wink pattern, and the breaks coming with you'll see I've chopped up the second break. I had to separate the kick out of the break so I could get the rhythm that I wanted to match the Lynn Collins one. Actually, it's come out sounding quite Prodigy, that, hasn't it? And I'm not going to complain. So that's what we've got for our second half of our drop. Also, I've brought in the high string, because he has one in there. If you need orchestral sounds, by the way, the BBC Symphony Orchestra by Spitfire is free and it's fantastic. So I've just sampled that. It's frozen because I didn't want the slow onset of the string. I wanted to sample the middle bit where it was already at full volume, and then just loop that, which would be a bit more like an old sampler anyway. As you can see, I've made it very mono, turn the width down. There's some bit reduction on there. So that's gone 12 bits, 16 kilohertz, which is a typical kind of vibe for old samplers. And I've made a VHS plugin, which is basically a bunch of distortion and pitch bend, just to give it some older vibes for the string there. Basically another way of picking up the second half. And then Josh Wink also had a second acid line, which I've introduced in the middle here. So we've got a breakdown here where I drop the original riff way back into the reverb so I can let the new riff come through with the strings staying there for tension. And we basically build with that. The original riff comes out of the reverb. The filter comes up on this new line as well. Again, it's the same. I think I used a sawtooth instead, though, to separate it. Yep, we got a sawtooth. We're not using the asymmetrical square, but it's the same setup otherwise. We've got the EQ going into this tube screamer distortion. The tape is on there as well. And some extra reverb, again, to make it sound different to the lead. This all comes in when the filter is screaming. So we've got a solid line underneath, so the top line can go absolutely mental. I'll show you that build. Oh yeah, we've got some 808 stabs in there, just to rattle the speakers at the club. I'm going to do the old crash thing. Oh yes, we must discuss the riff. So when I did this second drop with the original riff, I thought it was lacking a little bit of energy. That groovy gap started to work against me. So I decided for a more full-on second drop, I would add back all those kind of staccato notes and fill the gap, just so we could hit the second drop even harder. And that goes hand in hand with the high resonance. I've not gone as high as the original track because I think that would actually hurt a lot of people's ears on modern speaker systems. So I've actually, appropriately high energy, but not as ridiculous as the original. Here's our subline, by the way. It's just... You won't be surprised to find out it's just Vital. By the way, if you are using Vital, thoroughly recommend you pick up the Echo Soundworks, ESW, Echo Soundworks free pack of wavetables. In other words, recorded oscillators. They've recorded the oscillators out of lots of synths. So in here, I'm using the square wave from a Jupiter. You can see it's not exactly square, which is typical of a lot of analog synths. There are some, obviously, variations in the waveforms, and they offer a variety through the changing the wavetable position as well. So you can get all the different permutations of what that synth might have been capable of. So I'm just using a slightly wonky square wave. We are distorting that with the inbuilt clipper. And there's a little bit more distortion coming from Variety of Sounds Ferric TDS. Again, the tape simulator, best one on the market. Well, certainly for free. IMO. There's a tiny bit of EQ on there. I'm trying to get the second harmonic out, as you can see. That note. Important for smaller speakers, but that's our last drop. And then the only other thing I've got to mention, I suppose, is the way I changed the break in the second drop. The classic break restart. Back in the day when you would trigger a whole break on a sampler, people obviously realized if you re-triggered at certain points, you could get new grooves. It sounds like this. And Josh Wink does have a break like that in his last drop as well. Same kind of vibe. Obviously, I've brought the new kick and sub vibes over to it as well. So I've done the sub dive to go along with that. Again, constantly automating and changing the acid sound until the last drop, where I have done all the filter and resonance controls manually recorded into Ableton as automation on the push. Let me show you. There we go. You can see where I went crazy with the filter knob, just like at the end of Josh Wink's original. Just trying to make it talk, really. And that's it. That's the direction I went. So I'll be finishing that off and releasing that soon. I think I need a vocal sample. One of those Akai stretched, grainy vocal samples. If you watch the Guy Who Beats video, he does a fantastic emulation of that, which Ableton could do when you put it into one of its older modes. I think a vocal sample, an arrangement. I think I'm pretty happy with the sound. I don't really need to do much. And that's about it. Right, there we have it. My take on a Josh Wink tribute. Let me know what you think in the comments. Actually, let me know if you've got any name suggestions, what we might call this for release. That'd be really cool. And in the meantime, as always, I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something. Hit like if you liked. Hit sub if you loved. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.